AMC was the scrappy underdog, often very innovative and leading the industry, but was forced to constantly innovate in their fight for survival against the big three of Ford, GM, and Chrysler. They had an outsized influence in their 30-ish year history while they suffered success, losses, and partnership, and eventually they slowly lost their identity. But in the end, they ended up changing another company from the inside out. This is a far too brief history of American motors. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and I personally don't have many memories of AMC, and I don't know anyone that actually ever owned one. I mean, sure, I remember the Eagle and the Premier, the Pacer, the Gremlin, and the Javelin, but I don't remember anyone I knew ever actually choosing an AMC. Sadly, looking back, I find many of their cars desirable. I'll be honest with you, I started this AMC history because I thought it would be easy after a couple of blockbuster ones like Plymouth and Pontiac with long histories. I thought something with a 30-year lifespan and a limited product range would have been a lot easier, but actually, this has been far longer for me to put together. Their history is full of what-if moments, and I've realized three overarching things. The first is that their initial history is like a soap opera, that the middle of their history is ripe with excellent leadership, innovation, and just a few decisions that could have changed their history or at least left them in control of their own destiny. And that at the end, they had that outsized influence on the auto industry that continued after they were purchased by Chrysler and to other brands as well. But more on that in my epilogue. Now, AMC was officially founded in 1954 with the merger of Hudson Motor Car Company and Nash Kelvinator Corporation. At the time, it was the largest corporate merger in U.S. history. But to get to that moment, let's take a little bit step back in time. Hudson was founded in 1909 by 8 businessmen who went to department store magnate Joseph L. Hudson and asked if they could use his name. He contributed some capital, and one of those partners was Roy D. Chapin Sr., who'd worked for Ransom Olds and whose son would run AMC, but more on that later. Their cars were successful, and by 1929 they had multiple factories around the world and were the third largest car maker after Ford and Chevy. Through their history, they had a legacy of innovation, including the first balanced crankshaft, dual brakes, an oil and generator light on the dashboard, and placing the passenger compartment between the frame rails instead of on top, making vehicles marginally safer, lower, with lower profiles, and overall more comfortable. They also had a great success in racing. Now, Nash was founded in 1916 by Charles W. Nash, a former GM president, who acquired the Thomas B. Jeffrey Company, whose best-known product was the Rambler, and whose founding dated all the way back to 1900. They also had success in innovations, especially for less expensive cars, like brakes on all 4 wheels. Nash chose George W. Mason to succeed him. He was the head of Kelvinator. Now, Mason's condition for taking the job was that Nash would take control of Kelvinator. So in 1937, Nash Kelvinator was born, uniting the totally non-synergistic businesses of autos and appliances. Using their shared expertise, in 1938, they introduced an optional conditioned air system, the basic idea of which we are still using today for our car heaters. They offered vacuum-controlled shifting, mounting the gear lever up on the dash. They leaned heavily into some wind tunnel testing. They used coil springs for the front suspension. In 1941, the Nash 600 was the first mass-produced unibody auto made in the United States. In 1954, using their combined expertise, they introduced air conditioning as an option in the first single-unit system, the general idea of which we still use to this day. For those manufacturers that survived the Great Depression and World War II, the market shifted by the 50s into a strong buyer's market. Smaller manufacturers such as Packard, Studebaker, Nash, and Hudson struggled for survival while Ford and GM engaged in a sales war, and needless to say, profits evaporated. Hudson CEO A.E. Barrett talked with George Mason of Nash to discuss a merger, while Mason had a bigger vision of combining Nash, Hudson, Packard, and Studebaker into one company. He believed that the only way to survive against the big three was to combine multiple brands into a company that could go toe-to-toe with the big three as an equal. In this way, he kind of foresaw the future. In a serious what could have been moment, that grand plan was torpedoed by pure ego, if you read between the lines a little bit. Mason had run Kelvinator, and James Nance of Packard had once run Hotpoint, another appliance manufacturer. So these two business rivals continued, and Nance would not consider a merger with what became American Motors unless he was the one in charge of the final company. Needless to say, Mason didn't want to go along with this, and in May 1954, American Motors was born through a stock transfer between Nash and Hudson, immediately becoming the fourth largest auto company in the United States. Mason became the CEO and president, while Hudson's president retired to become a board member and a consultant. Interesting historic note, this is the second American Motors. There was an earlier corporation founded by Louis Chevrolet that existed between 1916 and 1922 before merging into the Bessemer American Motors Corporation, eventually fading away. After the merger, Mason immediately began discussions with Nance, president of Packard, for use of the Packard 5.2-liter V8 and their Ultramatic automatic transmission. Just 2 months later, in July 1954, Packard acquired Studebaker. And unfortunately, in October of 1954, Mason died. Now, his successor was George W. Romney. Yes, the daddy of that guy. And he squashed any further discussions of a merger between the companies, but continued the commitment for parts. AMC also began developing its own V8 and ended the use of the Packards in 1956 and eventually switched to using GM's Hydromatic or Borg-Warner transmissions. Another interesting historical note, Romney had been offered Nance's job, but turned down more money to work with Mason, believing that Nash had a better future. One immediate impact of combining purchasing and production allowed Hudson to drop their prices between $155 and $204. And after the merger, AMC had its first profitable quarter in 1955, the second quarter. Models such as the Rambler were badge engineered between the brands and continued to use their own engines, ending up as different as Chevys and Pontiacs of the time. The Nash Statesman was made the Hudson Wasp, and the Nash Ambassador as the Hudson Hornet. And yeah, that was the basis for that guy right there. Their larger cars did not sell well, and AMC was losing money. In 1956, Romney decided their future was the Rambler line. The larger car production was halted, and resources were allocated so that the entirely new Rambler 6 and V8 with a longer 108-inch wheelbase could be introduced a year earlier in 1956. Of special note is the Rambler Rebel. Introduced in 1957, their goal was to go where the big three weren't, an intermediate or mid-size model with big power. AMC's new V8, a 327 cubic inch producing 255 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque, was installed. Making this, honestly, the predecessor of the muscle car. For comparison, the standard V8 in the Rambler at the time was a 250 cubic inch engine, and although it was the smallest V8 in an American car in 1957, it made 190 horsepower. The same as a 272 cubic inch from Ford and more than the 283 cubic inch from Chevy. Initial sales of these models were terrible, and as were the financial losses. But after a media blitz and Romney touring the nation hyping up the cars, by 1958 sales improved dramatically, and that year was the company's first full year of profitability, showing a sales increase in a recession economy. This was partially helped by the introduction of the Rambler American in 1958, a restyling of the previous car on the 100-inch wheelbase and offered only in two-door form initially, with a 3.2-liter flathead 6 making all of 90 horsepower. This model lasted until 1960, with sales increasing from its first year of 30,640 to 120,603 by 1960. The Nash and Hudson brands were officially dropped, and the Rambler became the mainstay of the company. Of another special note is the Metropolitan. This was a Nash design that fit into what we would now call a subcompact class. Aimed as a personal use auto, it was intended either to be a second car for women or an economical commuter car. Nash knew it was prohibitively expensive to produce such a car in the US, and they contracted with Austin in England to build them. After the merger, they were their own nameplate and sold solidly, if unexceptionally, until production ended in 1961. The company continued to buck the trends of the time, focusing on compact cars and fuel efficiency, parts sharing, very careful cost controls, and refusing to participate in the Big Three's race to restyle every single year. Ramblers developed a reputation for being solid, well-built economy cars. Interestingly, AMC also experimented with non-gas powered cars, forming a joint venture in 1959 to consider producing electric vehicles. The 1960s were a time of innovation at AMC, introducing new stuff long before the rest of the Big Three. Just a few examples are being an early pioneer of the tandem master cylinder in 1962, allowing braking even if there was a failure in the system, a safety feature only Cadillac had, and 6 years before it became mandatory. They also used an automatic shift indicator that put neutral between reverse and drive, which became mandatory in 1968 and is essentially the same design that we use today. They offered dual reclining front seats nearly a decade before the rest of the Big Three offered them even as options. Disc brakes were standard on their Marlin and an option on other models in 1965. In the early part of the 60s, small cars were in vogue and played to the company's strengths, pushing the Rambler to third place in sales, and profits were healthy year after year, including the company becoming debt-free. In 1961, they agreed with the UAW on a profit-sharing plan, which was new to the auto industry, as well as annual pay increases and automatic cost of living adjustments. In 1962, Romney resigned to run for governor of Michigan, and he was replaced by Roy Abernathy, an AMC sales executive. In 1964, Studebaker ended U.S. production. In 1966, their Canadian operations. The last smaller auto companies were AMC, Kaiser Jeep, International Harvester, Avanti, and Checker. Abernathy believed that AMC's reputation for reliable, economical cars could be applied to move AMC buyers up to larger and more expensive models. While their large models were as large as Ford and Chevy, they needed to stretch into the very largest segment, where they had canceled the Wasp Statesman, Hornet, and Ambassador in the 50s. In 1961, two major redesigns happened. The 108-inch Rambler 6 and 8 were redesigned and renamed the Rambler Classic. It was redesigned again in 63, in 65, and was replaced by the Rambler Rebel between 67 and 70. The Rambler American was also redesigned, but mechanically identical to the previous model in 1961, and a third generation of that debuted in 64, now with a 106-inch wheelbase. By 1966, their full and mid-size cars, the Ambassador and the Marlin, were redesigned to a fluid new styling and sold well, but the dated Rambler Americans were actually selling worse. Quality control problems plagued the full-size cars. Rumors persisted of the company's demise due to cash flow, and negative safety ratings all worked to turn the public away in spite of previous good reputation for the cars. Critically, they had also de-emphasized the Rambler brand, believing it was too associated with economy cars, when performance and luxury cars were selling strongly. Thus, in 1966, the Ambassador and the Marlin were badged purely as AMC products. Corporate earnings began to fall. In 1967, another new design was unveiled, and that not only added retooling costs, but the new model shared even fewer parts and were now more expensive to build. The models were well received, but the company lost money, about $12 million for the fiscal year, and had lost money every year that Abernathy was in charge. He was forced into, quote, early retirement and replaced by Roy D. Chapin Jr., yes, the son of Hudson's founder, in 1967. He almost immediately cut prices on the Rambler to recapture the economy market. He made air conditioning standard on all the 1968 Ambassador models, becoming the first U.S. automaker to do so, even before Lincoln and Cadillac. In 1968, the AMX was introduced and was at the time only one of two American-built two-seat cars, with the other one being the Corvette. Historically, it was the first steel-bodied two-seat American performance car since the 1957 T-Bird. While it was getting attention, it sold relatively poorly, lasting only one generation until 1970. In 1968, also, the four-seat Javelin was introduced, their competitor to the pony car and the muscle car market. Like the AMX, it was actually based on the Rambler American platform with a 109-inch wheelbase. First-year sales totaled more than 55,000 units after strong press response. It was redesigned in 1970 before a second generation came out in 1971. And no, I'm not going to try to cover all of the different engine options available. AMC sold off Kelvinator of the appliance division to raise cash, and while in 1968 canceled the Rambler mark entirely. The brand actually continued to be used for other export markets. In fact, you could still buy a Rambler in Mexico all the way up to 1983. From 1970 on, American Motors was the brand and their new corporate logo. As we move into the 70s, we need to stop at the 60s. That Chrysler Jeep wanted to sell its Jeep division and get out of automotive. And while most of the top management at AMC opposed the move, Chapin thought the Jeep brand complemented their car lineup, giving them a product the big three didn't really compete in, as well as the government contracts for military and postal Jeeps. After they purchased it, the Military and Special Products Division was reconstituted into the American Motors General Products Division, later known as AM General. Yes, the guys who made Hummer. In 1970, they debuted the Hornet range of compact cars, and later that year, the smaller Gremlin shared the platform, becoming the first North American-built subcompact. It sold well, with more than 670,000 sold between 1970 and 1978, but the Hornet sold even better, moving more than 860,000 units by 1977. This platform actually continued until 1987. In 1971, the Matador was introduced as a midsize and later, in 74, full-size model, and achieved success as a police cruiser, a taxi, government vehicle, and was used in the TV show Adam 12, as well as placement in the James Bond film The Man with the Golden Gun. The Ambassador was redesigned and stretched just as the 1973 oil embargo hit, and thus it was canceled in 1974. At the time of its cancellation, Nash and AMC had made Ambassadors from 1927 to 1974, making it the longest-running brand model name continuously used in the industry at the time. The all-new Pacer was introduced in 1975 and marketed as the first wide small car.
I didn't know it was that wide.
A compact designed to offer the comfort of a full-size car. This car honestly deserves its own video, but it was originally designed to use a Wankel rotary engine being developed by GM. With the fuel crises, GM canceled the program, and AMC managed to squeeze in their 4.2-liter and 3.8-liter straight-six engines instead. With the new focus by consumers on fuel efficiency, this put it behind imports while also being an expensive car to make and sharing very few components with other AMC cars. Together, these missteps in a changing market and lost focus on their core strengths left the company with their more popular cars, like the Hornet and Gremlin, aging poorly, outsized cars, new cars that didn't sell well, and deteriorating cash flow, left them with very few options to fix their problems. In 1978, the Hornet was redesigned and named the Concord, aiming for, quote, premium compact buyers. The Pacer was modified to hold a V8, and the Gremlin was replaced with the Spirit in 1979. The Pacer was canceled, although a few were built in 1980. In 1977, Chapin retired and Gerald C. Myers became the chairman and CEO. The company had not paid a dividend since 1974, and AMC had lost over $73 million the previous 2 years. In 1978, AMC and Renault announced an agreement for the joint manufacture and distribution of cars. In the fiscal year ending 1978, AMC lost $65 million on their cars, but with strong Jeep sales, they got an overall profit of $36 million. Major recalls and an expensive engineering job to bring the Jeeps to meet new federal regulations faced the company. With 1.83% of the American market, AMC would receive $150 million in cash, $50 million in credit, and the rights to start building the Renault 5, what we know as Le Car, in 1982. Renault took 22.5% of the company in exchange. The companies had worked together previously, with Renault actually assembling knockdown kits of the Rambler cars back in the 60s. In 1979, AMC had a record $84 million in profit, despite all of the upheaval in the market. By the 80s, the future was cloudy. Jeep sales were falling, AMC's car line was not good enough against newer domestic competition, and the highly efficient Japanese cars were aiming for the heart of AMC's strengths, small cars. In 1980, banks refused American Motors any further credit, so the company turned to Renault for a $90 million loan. That's about $300 million in today's dollars. Market share continued to fall, and in December of 1980, shareholders approved Renault becoming the majority owner by allowing them to take up to 59% of the company over the next few years. Two Renault executives came over, both the VP of Finance and the Executive VP for Manufacturing. Critically, after Myers left, the Executive VP for Manufacturing took over as president and changed American Motors management while improving the plants. This drastic shift led to American Motors producing modern front-wheel drive cars from Renault at their ancient Kenosha plant that dated back to 1902. In 1979, AMC had introduced four-wheel drive versions of the Spirit and the Concord, calling them the AMC Eagle. Sales were strong, and this well-known product is widely considered as the first crossover. The two-wheel drive versions of these cars were discontinued after '83, while the Eagle in station wagon form continued until 1988. Between 1984 and 1988, the Eagle was the only car carrying the American Motors brand, as all others were Renaults or Jeeps. The first joint product of this alliance/ownership was the Alliance, a lightly restyled Renault 9 compact car introduced in 1983 with a hatchback version coming in 1984 as the Encore. Initially, this car was extremely well received. It won multiple awards, recognition, was Motor Trend's Car of the Year, and was number one on Car and Driver's 10 Best list for '83. Sales rapidly reached 200,000 by '84 and was hindered only by the fact it was available only in 2- and 4-door versions, although later it did get a convertible version. It was built by AMC workers at the Kenosha plant and built up a reputation very quickly for poor reliability, poor quality, and ultimately sales ended in 1987. Of special note here is the Jeep lineup. The all-new Cherokee was introduced in 1983 as an '84 model with Renault's Francois Castaing, I think I pronounced that close, heading up the development team and with an eye on this being sold in Europe. Sales forecasts of 40,000 its first year were shattered when they sold over 75,000. These products pioneered a new market segment of the sport utility vehicle and today are still in high demand as an excellent off-roader, with the model finally ending, unfortunately, in 2006. 1985 was a pivotal year. After canceling their larger cars and the control by Renault and the introduction of smaller cars, gas in '85 was once again cheap and buyers moved again to larger cars. The turmoil left AMC with an angry workforce, and rumors circulated that they were sabotaging vehicles on the assembly lines, with more rumors that the ancient Kenosha plant was going to be shut down. Warranty costs were high due to quality problems and with the cars such as the Alliance, and the U.S. government would allow AM General and its defense contracts to be under the control of a partially French-owned firm. At the same time, Chrysler couldn't meet demand for the Diplomat, the Grand Fury, and the Fifth Avenue, and entered into an agreement to use some of Kenosha's unused capacity to build these cars. Further, Renault's chairman was fired based on huge losses for the company, and Renault had managed to slide from number one in sales in Europe to sixth. At the time, they'd invested $545 million into AMC. Combine this with the closure of several plants and mass layoffs, and Renault management saw AMC as a bottomless pit. They realized they had three choices. They could declare it bankrupt and lose all of their investment, invest even more money hoping to turn it around, or try to put it up for sale and recapture some of their investment. The new chairman actually championed Renault's future in North America and pointed to the completion of the newest and most advanced auto assembly plant in North America, Rambler, as well as the new thoroughly modern fuel-injected 4-liter and 2.5-liter engines. Jeep's popularity was surging, so the chairman was confident AMC was on track to profitability. However, on November 17, 1986, he was assassinated by a far-left extremist group. Sentiment within Renault changed, and executives in favor of ridding themselves of AMC came to the forefront. As a note, in 1986, AMC lost $91.3 million. Even with the loss of the chairman and the loss of confidence of Renault, there was still a three-product lineup that was about to be rolled out. The mid-size Medallion, the larger Premier, and the sporty halo car, the Alpine. The first two were introduced, the Alpine never came here. In March 1987, Chrysler agreed to buy Renault's share of AMC for $1.5 billion. Being very open, they wanted AMC for the Jeep brand, for that new plant, and AMC's dealership network. Part of this agreement was for the Eagle brand to exist. A special note here is Jeep was developing the ZJ, what became fabulously successful as the Grand Cherokee. In 1988, American Motors was renamed Jeep Eagle Corporation, as a Chrysler subsidiary in 1990 was fully merged with Chrysler. The story of AMC as a company ends here, but some would argue it ended nearly 10 years earlier when Renault bought in an interest to it and installed some of their own leadership. To me, most importantly, is that AMC's corporate ethos changed those around them. They were early to rely on outside vendors with areas of expertise to give them an advantage when big companies like GM literally tried to develop every single thing in-house. They learned to work with maximum efficiency with their product design and redesigns. They were the first to totally immerse all auto bodies in primer to protect them against rust. The early adoption of aerodynamic efficiency and focusing on space efficiency of the interiors, and much, much more. Their four-wheel drive cars were the pioneers for the crossover craze, and the XJ Cherokee is the granddaddy of the current SUV craze. Even the Premier so impressed Chrysler, they used it as the basis for the development of their next-generation large cars, the LH platform. Finally, and most importantly, while Chrysler bought AMC for Jeep, what they found was a nimble and extremely capable engineering department. Iacocca kept AMC units intact, and AMC's lead engineer, Francois Castaing, was made head of all engineering at Chrysler, and he did the unthinkable by dismantling Chrysler's entrenched groups to put in place AMC's platform teams. These are close-knit, cross-functional groups that were responsible for a whole vehicle. Contrast this with what I've heard about auto design, where literally the engineers design something and toss it over to manufacturing, and manufacturing just has to figure out how to make it work, and later they throw it over to marketing to figure out what to do with it. These teams actually brought together manufacturing, engineering, design, marketing, and others into creating a car able to go to market cohesively. This platform strategy led to some of the products of Chrysler in the 90s, like the Neon, the Cloud Cars, and the LH platform. Beyond Chrysler, AMC still had an impact. When Bob Lutz was hired away from Chrysler by General Motors, he brought the systems and structures that originated with AMC. And Renault learned as well and took that hard-earned education when they rescued Nissan later on. Bob Lutz described those from American Motors like the Marines on Wake Island. Quote, with almost no resources and fighting a vastly superior enemy, they were able to roll out an impressive succession of new products. It's hard to read about AMC and not wonder so many what could have been. What if Renault had stuck it out for a year or two longer and gotten the Grand Cherokee out along with their new products and a new plant and fixed their quality issues? What if after Romney left, the leadership hadn't taken their proverbial eye off the ball of part sharing, quality, cost controls in the search for larger cars and larger profits? What if they'd kept their focus on smaller and more economical cars and been able to see the move in the early 70s with these oil crises? Seeing the VW Rabbit could have been exactly what they needed to make the move to smaller and front-wheel drive cars years before other manufacturers jumped in. In fact, they'd considered a competitor to the Omni and Horizon, but either couldn't or wouldn't move forward. And remember, this is a company that used unibody cars for 40 years. It's hard to argue with their move to muscle and pony cars to higher profits at a time when it's obvious that's where the market was, but not focusing on being as lean as possible left them vulnerable and ultimately one step out of phase with the market when things changed. Multiple products such as the Gremlin and the Pacer are often picked on, but through another lens, they represent amazing achievements for an underfunded company. Somewhat forgotten, often joked about, AMC was an innovative trendsetter for much of their history. And now looking back, I am really sorry to see them gone. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this far too brief history of AMC. I mean what I said, that I didn't know anybody who ever really had an AMC, chose an AMC, but I found while I did this video, I've absolutely fallen in love with the company and many of their products. The old Rambler American, things like that, they're fabulous little cars. There's so much innovation baked into this company, and there's so much missed opportunity, especially at the small car craze that really started in the 70s. They should have been right there, but they were just out of step coming up with the Gremlin and the Pacer, some interesting ideas that just went horribly wrong. This ended up being a huge video. I have cut so much out of this about their product lines or about the impact Dick Teague, their designer, had on the company and the industry as a whole. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed this video and you want to help support more videos about auto histories and individual markets, individual cars that I will get into, please consider supporting this channel. Please subscribe. Please like this and leave a positive comment below. Thanks, y'all.